Hi everyone and welcome. My name's Stuart Hayden and I'm founder of Storm Beach, specialising in authentic leadership. I keep myself busy as a coach, facilitator, consultant, author and speaker. Today, as you can see, I'm delighted to be joined by Anthony McCann. And Anthony, rather than me giving you a somewhat false introduction, I'd rather just hand over to you so you can say a few words to our viewers to say who you are, what you're doing and maybe why we're here today.
Hello, how are you doing? My name is, as Stuart has said, Anthony McCann, and I'm based in Hollywood in Northern Ireland. As a coach, I very much focus on the quality of relationship between people. So I'm very interested in what I've been researching for the last number of years, which is the idea of politics of gentleness in the coaching relationship, which is very much about a deep listening to the possibilities of relationship between people, between a coach and a client, maybe even thinking beyond the idea of a coach role and a client role and really thinking about the idea of two people in a space and the quality of relationship that brings to the space. So I'm very interested in that. I'm also very interested in unhelpful dynamics and how they happen, how they creep into our relationships without us even realizing it, particularly in the coaching relationship, but also more generally in life. So I'm very, very interested in that. And apart from that, I've a wife and a one-year-old son here in Hollywood and very much enjoying our lives here.
Excellent. And we met at the EMCC, the European Mentoring Coaching Council, the conference we spoke at earlier in June back in Dublin. And I suppose when I first saw your brief, I was like, coaching and gentleness, I was gripped straight away. And it's funny you mentioned a little one there because our daughter's almost 2 now. And what I reflected on as soon as I saw your brief was about coaching and gentleness, is that one of the words that my daughter has learned, probably in her top 10 words, is gentle. Gentle, 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 because it covers a plethora of things at an early age. And I saw the coaching and I was reflecting on something else that Lao Tzu had written about gentleness. So we never really got a chance to speak about this, but I was wondering how did you bring the two concepts together in the first place? Because as far as I know, no one else has kind of touched upon that area.
Well, I think it was partly to do with an absence that I found when I was working as an academic and looking at political theory and social theory. Mm-hmm. I found a real absence of the people that I most admired. There was very little that could adequately describe them, mm-hmm. And nothing to explain them, and nothing to understand how I might be like them.
Yeah.
I was looking at social theory books and political theory books, and I was particularly interested in the way that people thought about power. Mm-hmm. And power tends to be understood either as control, mm-hmm. that you can control the behavior of somebody else or control what's going on in your life, or as the management of resources. So you can then have an ability to manage resources, and the better you manage resources or produce resources, the more power you have. Mm-hmm. And that just didn't fit the lives of these people that I thought were terribly powerful, mm-hmm. and who I admired as well. So what I was trying to do with the politics of gentleness work originally was I was trying to find a way to talk about the power of the people that I admired, to talk about the power of my parents, my grandparents, my cousins, my uncles and my aunts. And the rest of my family, of course.
Be careful there, just anyone to add.
And the power of offering someone a cup of tea when they come in from the cold at the front door, the power of being there by somebody's bedside when they're ill, the power of holding a child's hand as you walk them across the road, the power of a smile. So I was very interested in trying to find ways to talk about power in those ways, and what John Cassavetes, the independent filmmaker, calls the power of small emotions. Mm-hmm. So I was very interested in this notion of the power of small emotions, mm-hmm. and finding a way to talk about that in a theoretical sense, but also in a theoretical sense that was deeply practical and pragmatic. Mm-hmm. So I moved away from the idea of power as control, because if power is control, mm-hmm. then only those who seek to control can be powerful, mm-hmm. and those who do not seek to control become powerless.
Yeah.
And the people I was most interested in emulating were people who did not seek to control. And I did not regard them as powerless, and I did not respect any way of thinking about the world, mm-hmm. that rendered them powerless and thereby rendered them also invisible, politically speaking, in terms of change, in terms of transformation, in terms of making a difference in the world. So I wanted to find a way to talk about making a difference in the world that included those people and included the type of life that I wanted to live. with my wife, with my child, with my friends, with anybody I met. And that sense of gentleness, the word gentle kept coming up again and again and again, particularly after people had died, where people would talk about their parent or their, some friend who had died and say, oh, he was a very gentle man. Oh, she was a very gentle sort. And I kept hearing this at funerals and after funerals and thinking, that's exactly what I'm looking for. And I didn't want to keep the explicit connection that many people keep between gentleness and religion, and Christianity in particular. And people talk about gentleness as a virtue of Christianity. And I wasn't coming from that perspective, so I wanted to find a way to develop a way of thinking about gentleness that could be quite systematic, but could also be very invitational for people and make them think, you know what, this is something I already value. Maybe this is also something that could help me transform my life, my world. So that was kind of the heart of it.
I think that's the real value. Is we all value this, but we perhaps don't realise that. I said it took me to, be a father to realise how important just as a value and as a word it was. I suppose what's interesting for me, I was working with a client the other day. We talked about, and to give a bit of background, obviously respecting confidentiality, client, MD, financial institution, and has a large team and, not just thousands but millions of dollars in his portfolio. And I asked him about his behaviours. Who do you need to be in the coming months to succeed in his leadership role? And he talked about humility. We went on then to talk a little bit about gentleness as well. And we both reflected, and especially in his financial world, in the city of London, what would it be like if his boss came along and said, "Okay, I'd like you to be really humble this year." It just would be one of those goals that he knows that he values. And, he is a humble and gentle person, definitely, but also a significant portfolio. How have you found that kind of message? I get it, we get it, and I know in my work there's so many things I just hold to be so, in inverted commas, true. And then how I transfer that into my clients, the business world, is sometimes the skill that we require to take it to a place where we transform.
I have developed a number of different languages for it. So one of the ways in which I now talk about gentleness is ordinary ethics. So ordinary ethics includes not only gentleness, but hospitality, generosity, trust. As soon as you say trust within an organizational context, people start to understand what you're talking about. And one of the difficulties in the way that people often think about trust is that trust is understood as a switch on, switch off mechanism a lot of the time, certainly in the literature. And what's really interesting to me is the way in which there are very subtle changes in trust, in hospitality, in gentleness, in humility, and various forms of hospitality within a particular environment, within a particular space, within a particular relational context, where people are with people. And what's of greatest interest to me is the dynamic when you have a situation where suddenly trust, gentleness, caring, nurturing, hospitality, generosity start to feel inappropriate in an environment, organization. And it starts to become the unlikely option in an environment. So what I'm really interested in is this idea that, the health of an organization can be judged. I've been developing tools for this, that the health of an organization can be judged on the basis of the appropriateness or inappropriateness of ordinary ethics, of generosity, gentleness, all sorts of things, and that becomes the canary in the coal mine, in a sense, to gauge the health of an organization. And I think one of the difficulties is that the workaday philosophies of a lot of organizations, driven by methodological, individual ways of thinking about economics and politics and various other things, a lot of the ways that people think about economics in a very old school sense, with the profit motive and the drive for goals and the drive for product, ends up making a lot of this people stuff very, very inappropriate. And that's crucial, because once that becomes inappropriate, an organization becomes unsustainable culturally over the long term. And that's something that I think in coaching is one of the biggest challenges, is how do you work with people where they are and bring them to a place of their own awareness that what they're doing might not be working and aligning with their best intentions.
And that brings us about where they are. And again, in the conference you talked a bit about presence, and that was I really enjoyed that take on it. It's always a value that defines my work. And I also loved, if you can remember, you came up with a few made-up words as well for how you defined presence. If you could say a bit more about that, and then I think then that starts and then to create the overall picture of, you know, gentleness, trust, presence, etc., etc.
Mm-hmm. Well, I found that the word presence wasn't very well developed in a lot of the things that I looked at, and I think people were making some great claims for the idea of presence. You know, presence would solve world hunger. Presence would, you know, end all nuclear war. Presence would, you know, solve all our economic problems. Presence was this great panacea for a lot of people that would provide, you know, some great magic quality to whatever it was we were doing. And on the one hand, I tend to get a little circumspect when it comes to magic formula and panaceas. On the other hand, presence was also something which other people were saying you cannot even ever achieve, that there's no such thing as authentic presence, there's no such thing as actually, you know, being in the moment, because it's always mediated by language or it's always mediated by something. So it becomes something that is not only not desirable but not possible or something. And then you have other people, on the other hand, because there are three hands, that talked about presence. But when they talked about presence, I didn't think they were talking about presence. I thought they were talking about a quality of relationship, which for me goes beyond presence. So for me, presence is something very straightforward. It's about being here and being with. So here-ness and withness, as I call it. So it's that combination of here-ness and withness where, you know, presence doesn't do very much. It's kind of just a quality of being human. What you then do on the basis of that presence is what is of interest to me. So you have the idea of here-ness and withness, but then you're also near people. So you've got this sense of proximity, so you're near. So nearness comes in there too, so that adds to that sense of quality of what quality of relationship you have with people. And this is sort of where I start moving to. I've recently started moving towards an Irish language concept called Garaíocht, which is Garaai accent OCHT. Garaai accent OCHT. And Garaíocht is a single word, which comes from the sense of to be in the place of Garaíocht. If you happen to be sitting at somebody's table and they have the teapot over there and you would like the teapot, you would say to them, seeing as you're in the place of Garaíocht, could you please hand me the teapot? So the idea is that you're in a position where you're able to help someone because you're beside something. Because it comes from the term gar, which means near to. The term gar can also mean a favor that you do someone. So the adjective for near to in Irish can also mean a favor. So Garaíocht in and of itself, for me, contains a lot of the things that are really important about this conversation about presence that people then use to speak about quality of relationship and transformation and change, which is that you have here-ness, you're definitely here with people. You have withness, you're definitely with people. You have nearness, because it's at the heart of the concept. You have action, because it's not only a noun, it's also an action as a verbal noun. Which in English there aren't too many verbal nouns, strictly speaking, but it's a noun that is also a verb. So you're always active. So it's a quality of action that you're engaged in all the time, potentially. You are in a position to help, and also you're in a position to identify opportunities to help. So all of those things are contained within this concept of Garaíocht, and I've started to use this term as a really basic principle and basic value in the way that I think about presence, way I think about coaching, way I think about life in general. There are another few terms that I'm working on as well, but that central core term of Garaíocht as a value, as a kind of philosophy of life and change, I think is a real challenge for us at a time when I think a lot of leadership philosophies are falling short of what we need. And I keep thinking about this idea that we are the ones we've been waiting for. You know, that this sense of understanding power, the power of small emotions, that power of gentleness I was thinking about, understanding that as the way that we are always in a position of mutual support, we're always in a position of interdependence, that we're able to move towards more focused understanding of that. And that by having whatever values we have, like Garaíocht or something else, that allow us to always remember that sense of interdependence, always remember that sense of helpfulness, that I think we can be invited through that to a greater sense of mutual leadership. Leadership without leaders, remembering Bruce Lee's way of no way. But the leadership without leaders, that it's about, identifying how, and this is classic coaching really, identifying how yourself can make a difference in your own life and in other people's lives without having to feel like you need to jump over a gorge or jump over an abyss to do so. And I think that's really crucial to it.
And it sounds like you're really on the journey. And I suppose bringing it back, you mentioned there to coach and the coachee when we work with them, they're on the journey. Have you yet got to the point in your I suppose research where you're able to really articulate this for a would-be coach to say, well, okay, this is about presence, trust, gentleness here with nearness. Have you got it to a position in your journey yet when that's starting to shine through?
Yes. Well, it's a combination of two things at the same time. One is developing CPD workshops for coaches. Okay. I've got a series of 6 CPD workshops at the moment, which explore these issues one by one. I think one of the difficulties about a conference presentation where we first met is that you try and pack so much into a single 20-minute presentation, and or was it 40 minutes? I think even 40-minute presentation. And when I went back to it and I started thinking about how you communicate this to people in a more gentle sense, it broke down into 6, maybe even 7 workshops, all based around this idea of the politics of gentleness and the practice of coaching. So looking at things like, for example, human nature. What do we think human nature is about? What do we think the possibilities of human nature are? Where do we think we can go? And if we clarify what we basically understand, like, is it all good? Is it all bad? Is it somewhere in the middle? Is it, if we understand the basics of human nature as we ourselves think about them, then we get a better understanding of the parameters of political possibility and transformational possibility in the ways that we think about things. Or another one on power, and the way that we think about power as coaches, are we catalysts or change makers? And we sometimes don't clarify that. Are we intervening, or do we talk about it as intervention? Do we talk about it as catalyzing? Do we talk about it as changing other people? Or what's our language for what we ourselves do? And I think there's a vast range of the way that different coaches approach this. So there was kind of 6 workshops involved there. And the other side that I was talking about is that at the same time I'm developing these as workshops for primary school children.
Wow.
Because that sense of Garaíocht, it's a very simple concept, that brings in all of the things that for a primary school child are second nature. That yes, everyone's around. Yes, we can all be helpful to each other. Yes, everybody's near to me, and I can do whatever I can within what's near. These are for a child. These are really simple concepts, and if you can give them something, an anchor to hook these things onto when they're a child, then when they grow up to be an adult, they won't be forgetting them so easily. But I think one of the things is that these kind of natural qualities of our lives, we've forgotten them very, very easily. And I think one of the challenges as coaches is to tap back into that quality that is always already available to us in our own lives, and to tap into that and say, okay, what do I not have to make too much of an effort to do? What's already here? And it's classic coaching, appreciative inquiry. What do I have available to me right now in terms of changing my life, transforming my life, transforming other people's lives? And I don't have to be someone else. I don't have to be somewhere else. I don't have to find hope somewhere else. Hope it works better when it's here. And that's part of the idea.
Brilliant. And then perhaps sort of draw into maybe my final question. And I should say for the viewers, by the way, it's not actually Christmas, is it? Despite your Christmas tea mug.
Oh yes.
So in case
Christmas, it's always.
In case you're wondering why we don't say Merry Christmas at the end, it's because it's just a Christmas mug out of context. So I'm sure our observant coaches will have spotted that, but just being playful. You talked at the conference about the correlation of different factors, and in terms of gentleness. So if I as coach is experiencing, say, emotion, and that's for me at the moment is quite intense in that moment. Actually, what you talk about is a lot of other factors will also potentially be experienced as intense as well, which is really interesting for me because, of course, I'm aware of the whole supportive, challenging nature as being a coach. but I didn't perhaps recognise that when one of those kind of ramps up, potentially there's a whole raft of other values also being ramped up. So you've got to be really skillful as to how you guide us on that. So that might tie in with some of the other factors you mentioned earlier.
I'll be putting stuff about what I'm about to say on my Hummingbird Workshop blog. So it's at hummingbirdworkshop.com.
Okay.
But the central core of what you're talking about is what I call the cultural climate framework.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the cultural climate framework was trying to find basic principles for understanding how things change, when things change, and why things change. Mm-hmm. In terms of relationship. And what I was looking at was the correlation, direct correlation, in particular, I'll just focus on two of them, in particular on the relationship between intensity of emotion and the expectation that uncertainty can be or should be eliminated. So the elimination of uncertainty ethic. And what I found was that the more we try to eliminate uncertainty, the more emotional or intense the situation tends to become. And for me, the elimination of uncertainty, and the more emotional or intense things tend to become, the more we tend to reach for elimination of uncertainty thinking, which is a kind of a key point. So it's about appropriateness to context, the kind of poetics of the way that things work. So the idea that elimination of uncertainty thinking is at the heart of this becomes important because, for me, eliminating uncertainty is deeply disrespecting the character of the experience that we ourselves live. Because if uncertainty is a present and variable part of everyday existence, every moment of existence, then thinking that uncertainty can be eliminated disrespects that entirely and basically says, I'm going to live in some sort of deluded, detached form of life that is some sort of fantasy life, which has no connection with what's actually going on in reality. So what was of interest to me is that the more intense emotions become, then the more we get drawn into thinking that this is okay, that eliminating uncertainty is okay. And that can be through control, it can be through perfection, it can be through goal setting in a too much of a trajectory sense, that goals are things that must be achieved. That can be very unhelpful. A research was done recently by David Megginson and David Clutterbuck, which suggested that European coaches tended to be less goal-oriented than American coaches. And I found that very interesting because, for me, goals are always provisional, that they provide the initial guidance, initial signposting towards some sense of what you might like to do in the future. But you don't take the signpost with you when you travel. And that's really important to me, that the goal becomes something you can dissolve at any point when it feels appropriate at that point to dissolve it. And that it's not something that you must always achieve. It's just kind of a launching pad for getting you going. And I think that sense of control that people have within their lives, that sense of perfection, as I've mentioned, the idea that things must be fixed all the time, I think that's a very key one in coaching, that we not enter into our relationship with our clients, our people, in a sense of we must fix what's wrong with them. I think that's always a crucial one. So there are a lot of different ways, a lot of different architectures of thinking, feeling, and doing that come along with this elimination of uncertainty ethic. But the easiest way to deal with it is to simply reduce the intensity of the emotional engagement you're in. I'm not saying always do that, because that would be eliminating emotional intensity, which would be an elimination of uncertainty way of thinking. But reduction of uncertainty is good. Reduction of emotion is good. And that the more intense I am about something, the more blind I am likely to be about what's actually going on in my life, or in terms of consequences of what I'm doing around me. So that's really, really important now to me as a general principle in terms of thinking about things is, am I becoming more intense? And can I do something to bring myself down again, de-escalate? And thinking about that as a helpful, always, de-escalation at any cost, in any way, and cups of tea, and having cups of tea that are in Christmas mugs is one way to, interject, whether it's humor or relaxation or being chilled or all those words that people use for bringing things down a little bit.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much. In terms of to honour the value of gentleness, I think we'll sort of bring it to a close there, because we could easily talk long into the, well, not quite night because it's early in the morning for us, but you mentioned a couple of references. I mean, we've met before and I'm just desperate for more, but can you just let us know if we want to find out a bit more about what you're doing? You mentioned about some of the CPD, some of the references. I'll put them in the blog anyway, so they'll be there in a written word, but if you could just mention those quickly now, that'd be great.
Well, the most recent one is the Hummingbird Workshop, which has recently been established. So that's for creative entrepreneurship, leadership, and professional ethics. So a lot of the details about the courses about CPD and other courses are available there. And there's a newsletter that people can sign up for, which I'd recommend. The motto of the workshop is, "I will not give in to failures of my imagination." And then anthonymccann.com is my own website. And if anybody wants to contact me, either on Twitter @AnthonyMcCann or info@anthonymccann.com.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much. Thank you for everyone for logging in today and taking a view of our interview. But big thanks to you, Anthony. It's great. Second time we connected. Deeply indebted to you. And hopefully I can owe you one and pay you back with some equally stimulating conversation on your own devices.
And cookies. Don't forget the cookies.
Cookies and more tea. All right. Take care. Thanks very much. Cheers. Bye-bye.